I was working the front desk at a hotel in Berlin when an American guest came down looking panicked. He showed me his phone. It said his train left at 14:30. He said, "Is that today or tomorrow?" I stared at him. I said, "It's today. At 2:30 p.m., he said, "Why does it say 14? I explained that's military time. He said, "I'm not in the military." I said, "Everyone here uses 24-hour time." He missed his train anyway because he spent 20 minutes arguing about it. Another guest that same week had a dinner reservation at 1900 hours. She showed up at 7 in the morning. The restaurant was closed. She called them angry. They said, "Your reservation is at 7 p.m.? She said, "It says 1900. They said, "Yes, 1900 is 7 p.m. She said, "That makes no sense." They said, "Subtract 12 from any number above 12. She said, "I'm on vacation. I shouldn't have to do math." She canceled the reservation. My friend worked at a train station in Amsterdam. An American guy asked when the next train to Brussels was. My friend said, 15:23. The guy said, "So 3:23? My friend said, "No, 3:23 p.m. The guy said, "That's what I said." My friend said, "No, you said 3:23. The train is at 15:23. The guy said, "Those are the same time." My friend said, "Not in 24-hour format." The guy bought a ticket for the wrong train and blamed my friend. Heard about a woman in Paris who set an alarm for 1700 hours, thinking it meant 5 a.m. She wanted to wake up early for a museum. The alarm went off at 5 p.m. She'd slept all day. She called the hotel furious, saying her phone was broken. The hotel asked what time she set the alarm for. She said 1700. They explained that's 5 p.m. She said, "Why would 17 be 5? They said, "Because 17 minus 12 is 5. She said, "That's terrible design." They said, "It's how time works here." A guy in Rome booked a tour starting at 0800 hours. He thought 08 meant 8 p.m. He showed up at 8 in the evening. The tour office was closed. There was a sign saying tours run from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. He called the company. They said, "Your tour was this morning at 8 a.m. He said, "It said 0800. They said, "Yes, 0800 is 8 a.m. He said, "Why is there a 0? They said, "To indicate morning hours." He demanded a refund. They said no. These stories happen constantly. Americans grow up with 12-hour clocks. We say 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. Europe uses 24-hour time. They say 0, 700, or 1900. And Americans absolutely lose their minds over it. They miss trains. They skip reservations. They show up 12 hours early or 12 hours late. It's chaos. So let's talk about every way Americans struggle when the clock goes past 12. Let's start with trains and buses, because this is where 24-hour time causes the most damage. Every ticket, every schedule, every announcement uses 24-hour format. And Americans just cannot handle it? I watched a couple at Munich train station argue about their departure time. Their ticket said 21:15. The husband said, "That's 9:15 p.m. The wife said, "No, it's 11:15 p.m. They both pulled out their phones to calculate. They were both wrong. 21:15 is 9:15 p.m. But they spent so long arguing, they missed the train. They had to buy new tickets. The ticket agent asked if they understood 24-hour time. They said, "We do now." A guy in Copenhagen bought a bus ticket for 1300 hours. He showed up at 1 p.m. thinking he was early. He wasn't. The bus left at 1 p.m. He'd arrived exactly on time. But he stood there waiting for the 1300 bus thinking it was different. After 20 minutes, he asked someone when the next bus came. They said, "The 1300 bus already left. At 1 p.m. He said, "But it's only 1. They said, "1300 is 1 p.m. He said, "That's so confusing." They said, "Only if you don't learn it." My friend sold train tickets in Brussels. An American woman asked for a ticket on the 1440 train. My friend printed it. The woman looked at it and said, "This says 1440. I said 2:40 p.m. My friend said, 1440 is 2:40 p.m. The woman said, "Why doesn't it just say 2:40? My friend said, "Because we use 24-hour time." The woman said, "Can you print it in regular time?" My friend said, "This is regular time." The woman took the ticket but looked unhappy about it. Someone in Prague missed their flight because they didn't convert the time. Their boarding pass said gate closes at 15:30. They thought that meant 3:30 a.m. Their flight was at 3:30 p.m. They showed up in the morning. The gate wasn't even open. They waited around confused. By the time they realized their mistake, the flight was gone. They had to buy a new ticket. The airline said, "You missed your flight." They said, "The time was wrong." The airline said, "The time was in 24-hour format." They said, "You should warn people." The airline said, "We're a European airline. This is how we show time." A woman in Vienna got on the wrong train because she misread the schedule. She wanted the 1600 train. She got on the 6 a.m. train instead. She thought 0600 meant 6 p.m. 1 hour into the journey, she realized she was going the wrong direction. She asked the conductor. He checked her ticket. He said, "This ticket is for 6 a.m. She said, "It says 0600. He said, "Yes, that's 6 in the morning." She said, "Morning should say a.m. He said, "Morning is indicated by numbers 0 through 11. She got off at the next stop and had to buy another ticket. Another guy in Sweden asked what time his train arrived. The board said arrival at 22:45. He said, "So 10:45? The person next to him said, "At night, yes." He said, "How do you know it's at night?" They said, "Because it's 22:45. That's afternoon." He said, "Why not just say 10:45 p.m.? They said, "Because 24-hour time is clearer." He said, "It's really not." They shrugged and got on their train. I heard about a couple in Norway who planned their entire day wrong because of time confusion. They had a ferry at 1700 hours. They thought that meant 5 a.m. They woke up at 4 in the morning. They rushed to the port. Nothing was open. They sat in the cold for an hour before someone told them 1700 is 5 p.m. They'd woken up 13 hours early. They went back to their hotel. The hotel charged them for an early checkout. They complained. The hotel said, "You checked out at 5 a.m. They said, "We thought our ferry was at 5. The hotel said, "Your mistake isn't our problem." Someone in Finland booked a rental car pickup for 1200 hours. They showed up at midnight. The rental office was closed. They called the emergency number. The agent said, "Your pickup is at 12 p.m. They said, "It says 1200 hours. The agent said, "Yes, noon." They said, 1200 sounds like midnight. The agent said, "Midnight is 0000. They said, "Why is midnight 0? The agent said, "Because it's the start of the day." They slept in the car and picked up the rental in the morning. A guy in Denmark missed a bus tour because he thought 1930 meant 9:30 a.m. He showed up at 9:30 in the morning. The tour company wasn't even there. He called them. They said, "Your tour is at 7:30 p.m. He said, "It says 19:30. They said, "19:30 is 7:30 p.m. He said, "I already paid." They said, "Come back at 7:30 tonight." He said, "I have dinner plans." They said, "Then you missed the tour." He left a review saying the time was misleading. It was not misleading. He just didn't convert. Another woman in Switzerland had a cable car reservation at 09:15. She thought 09 meant 9 p.m. She showed up at 9 in the evening. The cable cars stopped running at 6 p.m. She found a closed station. She called the company the next day. They said, "You missed your time." She said, "I came at 9 like it said." They said, 09:15 is 9:15 a.m. She said, 0 should mean night. They said, 0 through 11 is a.m. 12 through 23 is p.m. She said, that's too complicated. They refunded nothing. Now let's talk about restaurants and events. Every reservation, every showtime, every event listing uses 24-hour format. Americans see these times and panic. Or worse, they show up at completely the wrong time. I worked at a restaurant in Barcelona. An American couple had a reservation for 2000 hours. They showed up at 8 in the morning. We weren't even open for breakfast. I answered the door in my regular clothes. They said, we have a reservation. I said, for when? They said, 2000 hours. I said, that's 8 p.m. They said, it says 20. I said, 20 means 8 p.m. They said, why would 20 mean 8? I explained you subtract 12 from any number over 12. They left and came back that night. They arrived late and blamed me for the confusion. A guy in Paris had theater tickets for 15:30. He showed up at 3:30 a.m. The theater was obviously closed. He stood outside for 10 minutes before realizing his mistake. He looked at his ticket again. He Googled the conversion. He'd missed the show by 12 hours. He tried to exchange the tickets. The theater said no exchanges. He said, the time format is confusing. They said, only if you're not European. He posted online calling French time formats a scam. My friend managed a comedy club in Amsterdam. An American woman booked tickets for 2200 hours. She showed up at 10 in the morning asking where the show was. My friend said, the show is tonight at 10 p.m. The woman said, my ticket says 2200. My friend said, 2200 is 10 p.m. The woman said, that's not how time works. My friend said, that's exactly how 24-hour time works. The woman demanded a refund. My friend said no refunds for customer error. The woman left angry. Someone in Rome made dinner reservations at 1945. They thought that meant 7:45 p.m. Close, right? Wrong. 1945 is 7:45 p.m. They showed up an hour late. The restaurant gave away their table. They complained to the host. The host said, you missed your reservation by an hour. They said, we came at 7:45. The host said, your reservation was at 7:45. They said, same thing. The host said, it's not the same thing. They left a bad review saying the restaurant was inflexible. A woman in Berlin bought concert tickets starting at 2000 hours. She told her friends the show started at 10 p.m. It started at 8 p.m. They all showed up 2 hours late. They missed the opening act and half the main show. They complained at the box office. The box office said, the tickets clearly say 2000 hours. She said, I thought that was 10. They said, 2000 is 8 p.m. She said, the ticket should say 8 p.m. then. They said, the ticket does say the correct time. In 24-hour format. Another guy in Vienna had a cooking class at 1400 hours. He thought that meant 2 a.m. Who has a cooking class at 2 in the morning? Nobody. But he didn't question it. He just set his alarm. He woke up at 1:30 a.m. and went to the address. It was dark. The door was locked. He called the instructor. The instructor said, the class is at 2 p.m., he said. It says 1400. The instructor said, 1400 is 2 p.m. He said, I'm already here. The instructor said, at 1:30 in the morning, go back to sleep? I heard about a couple in Stockholm who booked a spa appointment for 1100 hours. They showed up at 11 p.m. The spa was closed. They'd somehow read 1100 as nighttime. They called the spa the next day. The spa said, 1100 is 11 a.m. They said, there's no a.m. or p.m. indicator. The spa said, numbers 1 through 11 are a.m., 12 through 23 are p.m. They said, that's not obvious. The spa said, it's standard across Europe. They rebooked but remained confused. Someone in Brussels had a museum tour at 1600 hours. They showed up at 4 a.m. The museum didn't open until 9 a.m. They waited outside for 5 hours. When staff arrived, they asked why the person was there so early. The person said, "My tour is at 1600. Staff said, "That's 4 p.m.? The person said, "I thought morning." Staff said, "Afternoon." The person said, "Can I still take the tour?" Staff said, "Come back at 4 p.m. The person was exhausted from waiting and fell asleep during the tour. A guy in Prague booked a walking tour for 0930. He thought 0 meant late night. He showed up at 9:30 p.m. The tour company was closed. He saw their sign listing hours. Tours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. He realized his mistake. He called the next morning. They said, "You missed your tour." He said, "The time said 09. They said, 09 is 9 a.m. He said, 0 sounds like midnight. They said, "Midnight is 00. Morning hours are 01 through 11. He said, "This system is broken." They said, "This system is used by most of the world." Another woman in Copenhagen had brunch plans at 11:30. She wrote it down as 11:30, but the restaurant confirmation said 11:30 as 11:30. She thought that was 30 minutes past 11 p.m. She showed up at 11:30 at night. The restaurant was closed for the night. She checked her email. The confirmation said 11:30 hours. She Googled it. That's 11:30 a.m. She'd missed brunch by 12 hours. She tried to reschedule. They were fully booked. She ate at a fast food place instead. Let's talk about hotels and daily life, because 24-hour time shows up everywhere. Wake-up calls, check-out times, facility hours, TV guides. Americans expect AM and PM. They get numbers instead. Problems follow. I worked at a hotel in Munich. An American guest requested a wake-up call at 0600 hours. We called his room at 6 a.m. He didn't answer. We called again. Still nothing. He came down at noon, furious. He said, "You never called me." I checked the log. We called at 6 a.m. He said, "I asked for a 6 p.m. wake-up call." I said, "You said 0600. That's 6 a.m. He said, "I meant 1800. I said, "Then you should have said 1800. He said, "I didn't know the code." I said, "It's not a code. It's time." A woman in Paris got confused by checkout time. The sign said checkout by 1200 hours. She thought that meant midnight. She stayed in her room all day. At 11 p.m., she started packing. Hotel security knocked at 11:30 asking if she was okay. She said, "I'm checking out at 1200 like the sign says." Security said, "Checkout was at noon." She said, "It says 1200. Security said, 1200 is noon." She said, "That's only 12 hours. Security said, 1200 is the 12th hour. Noon. She had to pay for an extra night. My friend worked at a hostel in Oslo. An American guy complained the breakfast room closed too early. My friend said, "Breakfast is 6 to 10. The guy said, "The sign says 06 to 10. My friend said, "Yes, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. The guy said, "I thought 06 was evening." My friend said, "Morning is 0 through 11. The guy said, "Why use 0? My friend said, "To differentiate from 12. The guy said, "Just say 6 a.m. My friend said, "We don't use a.m. and p.m. here." The guy ate at a cafe instead. Someone in Vienna tried to use the hotel gym. The sign said gym hours 14 to 22. He went at 2 p.m. The gym was open. He came back at 10 p.m. Also open. He finally figured out 14 was 2 p.m. and 22 was 10 p.m. But it took him 3 days. He told the front desk the signs should be clearer. Front desk said, "The signs are in 24-hour format." He said, "That's not clear to Americans." Front desk said, It's clear to everyone else. A couple in Rome got confused by their rental apartment instructions. The check-in time was listed as 1500 to 1900 hours. They thought that meant 3 to 7 in the morning. They contacted the host at 2 a.m. asking to check in. The host said, "Check-in is from 3 to 7 p.m. They said, "It says 15 to 1900. The host said, "1500 is 3 p.m. 1900 is 7 p.m. They said, "Why not just say that?" The host said, "I did, in standard European time format." Another guy in Brussels wanted to watch TV in his hotel room. The guide listed show times in 24-hour format. He wanted to watch a movie at 8 p.m. The guide showed movies at 1400, 1700, and 2000. He couldn't figure out which was 8 p.m. He called the front desk. They said, 2000 is 8 p.m. He said, "Why is it 20? They said, "Because it's the 20th hour of the day." He said, "The day starts at 1. They said, "The day starts at 0. He gave up and watched nothing. I heard about a woman in Helsinki who missed the hotel pool hours. The sign said pool open 10 to 18. She went at 6 p.m. The pool was closed. She complained to staff. They said, "The pool closes at 1800 hours. She said, "It says 18. They said, "18 is 6 p.m. She said, "The sign should say 6 p.m. They said, "The sign uses 24-hour time like everything else in Finland." She said, "That's discriminatory against tourists." They said, "It's just a different time format." Someone in Dublin booked a hotel room with late checkout at 1400 hours. They thought that meant they could stay until 2 a.m. Hotel called their room at noon, asking when they'd leave. They said, "Not until 1400. Hotel said, "That's 2 p.m. It's already noon." They said, "I thought I had until tonight." Hotel said, "Late checkout is 2 p.m. You have 2 hours." They rushed to pack and barely made it. A guy in Berlin ordered room service breakfast for 0730. Room service knocked at 7:30 a.m. He yelled, "Go away! I ordered it for tonight." Room service said, "You ordered 0730. That's 7:30 a.m. He said, "I meant 1930. Room service said, "Then you should have said 1930. He said, "I thought 0 meant p.m. Room service said, 0 through 11 is a.m. 12 through 23 is p.m. He didn't open the door. His food got cold in the hallway. Another woman in Amsterdam complained about noise restrictions. The hotel quiet hours were listed as 22 to 07. She was making noise at 10 p.m. Another guest complained. She said, "Quiet hours don't start until 22. The staff said, "It's already 2200. It's 10 p.m. She said, "That's not what the sign says." Staff showed her the sign. 22 to 07 means 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. She said, "Why can't it just say that?" Staff said, "It does say that." She got a noise violation anyway. Someone in Prague scheduled a hotel shuttle for 0530. The shuttle came at 5:30 a.m. They were still asleep. The driver called their room. No answer. The driver left. They woke up at 8 and called, asking where the shuttle was. Hotel said, "It came at 0530 like you requested." They said, "That's 5:30 p.m. Hotel said, "No, that's 5:30 a.m. 5:30 p.m. is 17:30. They said, "I hate this system." Hotel said, "The system is fine. You just didn't learn it." I want to end with the most ridiculous 24-hour time story I've ever heard. A guy in Stockholm had a flight at 0100 hours. That's 1 a.m. He thought 01 meant 1 p.m. in the afternoon. He showed up at the airport at noon. He checked in, got through security, found his gate, sat down and waited. Hours passed. His gate changed to a different flight. He asked an agent when boarding started. The agent checked his ticket. She said, "Your flight left 12 hours ago." He said, "My ticket says 0100. She said, Yes, 1 in the morning. He said, "Why would 0 mean morning?" She said, "Because 00 is midnight. 01 is 1 hour after midnight." He said, "That's the most confusing thing I've ever heard." She said, "Only if you never learned it." He had to buy a new ticket for $800. That's the core problem with 24-hour time. Americans refuse to learn it. They think it's too complicated. They call it military time and act like civilians can't understand it. But it's not complicated. After 12, you keep counting. 13 is 1 p.m. 14 is 2 p.m. 20 is 8 p.m. That's it. It's actually simpler than switching between AM and PM. The real issue is Americans expect the world to use their system. They don't want to adapt. They want Europeans to add AM and PM to everything just for them. But that's not happening. 24-hour time is standard across Europe, Asia, most of Latin America, and parts of Africa. It's used by airlines, trains, buses, hotels, and restaurants globally. If you travel, you need to learn it, and you can learn it in 5 minutes. Seriously, 5 minutes of practice, and you'll never miss another train. Memorize a few key times. 1300 is 1 p.m. 1800 is 6 p.m. 2300 is 11 p.m. Everything else you can calculate. Or just use your phone calculator. Subtract 12 from any number over 12. Done. But some Americans refuse. They'd rather miss flights and trains than spend 5 minutes learning. They'd rather argue with hotel staff than admit they didn't convert. They'd rather leave bad reviews than acknowledge their own mistake. I've worked in European tourism for 7 years. I've explained 24-hour time hundreds of times. Some people thank me and learn it immediately. Others argue with me like I invented the system personally. I didn't invent it. I just live here. And here, we use it. So next time you're abroad and you see a time like 1730, don't panic. Don't guess. Don't assume. Just subtract 12, or ask someone, or Google it. Do literally anything except show up 12 hours early or 12 hours late. Or keep doing that. Your confusion is my content. These stories never stop. Every day, another American misses a train because 2300 looks fake. Every week, someone shows up at 08 thinking it's nighttime. The cycle continues. I'll be here, watching, taking notes, converting your time